Today in the Daily Dose, Dante. Born in 1265 Florence, Italy, into a family heavily mired in the fractious Florentine political scene of the times, Dante Alighieri was slated to marry Gemma Donati in an arranged marriage when he was just 12 years old, although his true love, albeit unrequited, was Beatrice Portinari, who died tragically 5 years after Dante's 1285 marriage. Publishing Vita Nova, or The New Life, as a poetic tribute to his tragic love for Beatrice, his book of verse is notable in the fact that he wrote in the Italian rather than the Latin. Immersing himself in the study of philosophy and the seemingly endless conflicts in Florentine politics between those supporting the papacy versus those supporting the monarchy, Dante was forced into exile when he fell out of favor with the Black Guelphs, many in that faction who would find a place in Dante's most famous work, the Divine Comedy. Penning his Latin treatise De Vulgari Eloquentia, or the Eloquent Vernacular, while living in Bologna, Dante encouraged Italian authors to write in their native language in order to establish Italian in highbrow literature, in a further attempt, among other things, as a means of unifying the politically divided territories during the early Italian Renaissance. Exiled yet again in March of 1306, when Bologna expelled all its Florentine residents, Dante moved to Padua, where he wrote his famous three-book work on the monarchy, De Monarchia, after Henry VII was crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 1312, in which Dante proclaimed that the authority of the king was not dependent upon the Pope's approval, but rather descends upon a king directly from God. His divine right of kings assertion would find De Monarchia permanently banned from Florentine bookshelves. Completing his masterwork in Ravenna, shortly before his death in 1321, the Divine Comedy would prove to be his most lasting work of literature, even to this day. Written in the first person, the Divine Comedy is an allegory of human life as Dante travels through the Christian afterlife, warning readers to steer clear of the corruptions of human society in exchange for a chosen path of righteousness. Composed in 100 cantos and written in a poetic measure known as terza rima, his journey through hell and purgatory, as described in his Inferno and Purgatorio, employs the Roman poet Virgil as his guide, while many characters responsible for his exile from Florence find themselves suffering torturous existences during their eternal residence in hell and purgatory, while his guide through heaven or paradiso is none other than his lost love Beatrice, who leads him through the 9 levels of the heavens, where he learns to reject all things within the earthly realm of man in exchange for the heavenly paradise that awaits all Christian believers, making Dante Alighieri a leading voice during the Italian Renaissance. Geoffrey Chaucer. Born into a bourgeois family of well-to-do Londoners, sometime around 1340, as a teenager, Geoffrey Chaucer worked as a public servant for Countess Elizabeth of Ulster, the Duke of Clarence's wife, before fighting in the 100 Years' War. Captured at Rethel, his royal connections prompted King Edward III to pay for much of his ransom, before Chaucer spent the rest of his life as a diplomat and public servant to Great Britain and her aristocratic leaders. Marrying Philippa Rowett in 1366, the daughter of Sir Payne Rowett, the marriage did much to advance Chaucer's career in the English court. The couple lived abroad from 1370 to 1373, fulfilling diplomatic missions to Florence, Italy, followed by the establishment of an English port at Genoa. Despite his near-constant work distractions, Chaucer managed to carve out time for his original love, poetry. And while many of his most famous works remained unfinished at the time of his death, his contributions to English literature make his work highly readable, even to this day. Most likely written in 1380, when he spearheaded marriage negotiations between Richard II and Anne of Bohemia, Parliament of Fowls employs poetic allegory, incorporating elements of satiric irony that jabs at the superficial qualities of courtly love. Troilus and Crusade is a narrative poem retelling the tragic love story of Troilus and Crusade during the Trojan War, written in Chaucer's original technique of rhyme royal, which involves rhyming stanzas of 7 lines each. Another important yet unfinished work by Chaucer is The Legend of a Good Woman, which employs short poetic narratives written in iambic pentameter couplets, the first time such a technique was ever used in the English language. Yet his most famous work is Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which comprises 24 stories in fragmented and varied order, prompting many scholars to challenge the correct intended order of his unfinished work. Chaucer's original vision of writing 120 tales proved to be overly ambitious for a man with a full-time day job, yet his Canterbury Tales remain widely read for the beautiful rhythm of Chaucer's language, along with his clever injections of satirical wit. Passing away in London on October 25, 1400, Chaucer was entombed at Westminster Abbey, the first English writer to inhabit the now legendary Poets' Corner, making the works of Geoffrey Chaucer required reading for English majors everywhere. Donatello. Born in 1386 Florence, Italy, Donato di Nicola di Berobardi was nicknamed Donatello by his friends and family, before studying at the home of a wealthy Florentine banking family named Martelli, a patron of the arts closely allied with the Medici family. Apprenticing with sculptor Lorenzo Ghiberti, beginning in 1403, the duo beat out rival artist Filippo Brunelleschi to build the bronze doors for the baptistery of Duomo Cathedral, later befriending Brunelleschi when the two excavated ancient ruins in Rome to study Gothic art, an experience that would find its way into much of Donatello's early sculptures, such as his 2-scale rendition of biblical David. Donatello's maturity as a sculptor exploded between 1411 and 1415, when he rejected the rather soulless renditions of the Gothic period, instead embracing figures of great dramatic and emotional impact, including a marble figure of St. Mark's for the Orson Michiel Church, followed by a seated sculpture of St. John the Evangelist for the Duomo in Florence, both works reflecting the new science of perspective, which allowed sculptors to work in 3-dimensional space rather than 1-dimensional flat backgrounds. Even in his lifetime, Donatello's work became famous for his ability to accurately portray suffering, joy, and sorrow in the faces and body positions of his subjects. After producing several sculptural tombs in Rome with Italian sculptor and architect Michelozzo, Donatello developed a lucrative relationship with Cosimo de' Medici, who commissioned the sculptor to produce a second statue of David, which would become one of his most famously lauded works. He then traveled to Padua to produce a sculpture of famed mercenary Erasmo de Narni called Gattamelata, which soon became the blueprint for European equestrian monuments for several centuries to come. Returning to Florence, Donatello completed the Penitent Magdalena of a gaunt-looking Mary Magdalene, an homage of sorts to the repentant prostitutes at the Santa Maria Cestello convent, before retiring after the Medici family funded the remainder of his life. He passed away on December 13, 1466, of unknown causes, making the life and works of Donatello a groundbreaking innovator during the Italian Renaissance. Leonardo da Vinci. Born out of wedlock near Vinci, Italy in 1452, Leonardo da Vinci was educated in Florence by Italian sculptor and painter Andrea del Verrocchio, beginning his storied career in Florence before moving to Milan under the patronage of Ludovico Sforza. While Leonardo's fame was first celebrated by his genius as a painter, he soon proved to be the ultimate polymath of the Italian High Renaissance, where he displayed his talents as a draftsman, engineer, scientist, theorist, sculptor, and architect. He also became known for his notebooks, where he made countless drawings and observations on subjects as far afield as anatomy, astronomy, botany, cartography, paleontology, and human flight. Leonardo's seemingly unbounded curiosity epitomized the Renaissance humanist ideal, while many art historians believe his collective works were matched only by his younger contemporary Michelangelo. Over the course of his hyper-productive lifetime, Leonardo conceptualized armored fighting vehicles, flying machines, an adding machine, the catamaran sailboat, and concentrated solar power. And while most of his concept designs were never constructed, some of his lesser inventions were manufactured to little fanfare, including an automated bobbin winder and a machine for testing the tensile strength of wire. He also made groundbreaking discoveries in anatomy, civil engineering, optics, geology, and hydrodynamics, although his decision not to publish his findings resulted in little to no direct influence in each of his fields of study. Since his death in 1519, art historians and laymen alike have admired his achievements and diverse interests, cementing Leonardo da Vinci as one of the greatest painters in the history of art. While the majority of his works have been lost since his passing, less than 25 attributed major works exist today. His most admired paintings include The Last Supper, his Vitruvian Man drawing, and his magnum opus Mona Lisa, which is visited by more than 8 million people annually. In 2017, his painting entitled Salvator Mundi was sold for over $450 million, setting a new record for the most expensive painting ever sold at auction, making Leonardo da Vinci one of the greatest artistic geniuses in the history of modern man. Niccolò Machiavelli. Born into a long and well-respected family of Italian politicians, Niccolò Machiavelli was exiled from his long-held position in Florentine government when the Medici family returned to power in 1512. After observing firsthand the oftentimes brutal and cunning leadership of Papal States Prince Cesare Borgia, in particular when Borgia lured enemies into the city of Senigallia with promises of friendship and gifts, only to have the men assassinated, Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1513, during the height of the Italian Renaissance. Not published until 5 years after Machiavelli's death, his book chronicles what he felt were the necessary traits of a strong sovereign, particularly one capable of restoring Florence to its former glory. During his years as a Florentine statesman, a period mired by near-constant power struggles between the city-states of Italy, the Holy Roman Empire, and foreign interlopers such as Spain and France, Machiavelli had observed traits by many regional leaders, which bolstered power and influence in their favor. Unlike the noble traits of fairy tale princes and kings, Machiavelli maintained that a true leader ruled by calculated brutality, and when necessary, abject immorality. According to Machiavelli, the ends always justified the means, no matter how brutal or unethical those means might be. The fact is that a man who wants to act virtually in every way necessarily comes to grief among so many who are not virtuous, he wrote in The Prince, because people are quick to change their nature when they imagine they can improve their lot. While Machiavelli also wrote a second work known as The Art of War, which detailed a citizen's role in supporting military troops and military strategy to a nation's benefit, his writings in The Prince spawned centuries of both praise and outrage, including a 1559 ban on the book by the Catholic Church, followed by a second ban in Elizabethan England and stiff condemnation by the recently formed Protestant Church. The book also made Machiavelli's name synonymous with deceitful, unprincipled behavior, making the life and political writings of Niccolo Machiavelli a unique perspective in the long annals of human governance. The Jewish expulsion from Spain. After the Spanish took back the Iberian Peninsula from Moorish invaders in 1238 AD, in an effort to unify the separate kingdoms of Castile and Aragon under the common bond of Catholicism, in 1478, King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile established the Tribunal of the Holy Office of the Inquisition, intended to weed out heretics from the Catholic Church. Known simply as the Spanish Inquisition, after the medieval Inquisitions swept through Europe with an equal emphasis on violent anti-Semitism toward Jews and Muslims, Spain followed suit with her 3-century-long period of punishing inquisitions by the Catholic Church. While Jews and Muslims were at first tolerated in major Spanish cities, after the expulsion of Jews from England in 1290 and France in 1306, anti-Jewish sentiment climaxed during the Jewish massacre of 1391 in cities like Barcelona and Seville, which witnessed the slaughter of thousands of Jews, while others, known as conversos or anisim in the Hebrew, were forced to swear their allegiance to Christianity. For the thousands who refused conversion, most fled certain death by migrating to Poland and present-day Lithuania. The final shoe dropped in 1492, the year Columbus sailed for the New World from Spain, when on March 31st, Queen Isabella I and King Ferdinand II signed the Alhambra Decree, also known as the Edict of Expulsion, which ordered the removal of all practicing Jews from Spanish soil. By the time of Spain's expulsion edict, more than 200,000 Jews had converted to Christianity, which meant the primary purpose of the Alhambra Decree was to ensure that conversos and their descendants would not be tempted to revert to Judaism under the lingering pressure exerted by practicing Jews. Those who failed to convert, some 40,000 to 100,000 Jews, faced immediate expulsion under Spain's ethnic cleansing edict handed down from the Catholic Church and the monarchies of Castile and Aragon. Academics point to multiple hypotheses regarding the underlying triggers that sparked the expulsion edict, including a common embrace of Catholicism, as well as a desire to be accepted by other European nations who had already expelled their populations of Muslims and Jews, making the Jewish expulsion of 1492 yet another stain on Europe's long history of anti-Semitism. Bonfire of the Vanities. During the 13th through 15th centuries in Europe, at the dawn of the Renaissance, Dominican monks hosted a string of what historians have named bonfires of the vanities, intended to rid parishioners of sinful yet coveted objects that the Catholic Church labeled as heretical distractions from a Christian's obligation to focus on salvation through Christ. Yet the spark behind the largest bonfire began in 1490 Florence, Italy, when the city's ad hoc religious leader, Girolamo Savonarola, first began preaching about the coming apocalypse, which he believed would occur in 1500 unless Florentines rejected Satan's manipulating distractions, such as certain works of contemporary art, books, cosmetics, dresses, and more. Chief among Savonarola's complaints were religious artworks incorporating images of wealthy, albeit egotistical patrons who would commission the work in question, melding their mortal likenesses into depictions of key figures and events within the Old and New Testaments. Calling it modern and corrupt, Savonarola also took particular issue with female biblical figures in many paintings of the day, and in the months leading up to his Bonfire of the Vanities, in early 1497, even Sandro Botticelli added a good number of his paintings to the growing amassment of bonfire accelerants. While no one knows what possibly famous works of art Botticelli added to the bonfire, fortunately for art lovers the world over, his most famous works such as Birth of Venus, Primavera, and Venus de Medici thankfully survived. At the same time, the powerful Medici family had lost the respect of average Florentines, leading mobs inflamed by Savonarola's preaching to burn down the Medici's bank after the family had fled the city in fear for their lives. Dressed in white gowns sporting red crosses and garlands, an enormous bonfire was erected in the Piazza del Signoria under a mounted image of Satan, leading to the mother of all bonfires on February 7, 1497, which in turn led to Savonarola's fall from grace, when more sensible Florentines saw the event as a threat to their heritage and culture. His downfall was made complete by his repeated criticisms of the papacy, which ultimately led to his execution by the Catholic Church, making the Bonfire of the Vanities a stunning low point during the high-water years of the Italian Renaissance. Erasmus of Rotterdam. Born in 1467 Rotterdam, Holland, the illegitimate son of a priest, Desiderius Erasmus, or simply Erasmus, lost both his unwed parents to bubonic plague in 1483. Receiving the highest education available to a young man of his time, Erasmus was ordained into the priesthood in 1492 after falling in love with a fellow canon, although in later life he would renounce homosexuality by condemning sodomy and praising married sexual pleasure between a man and a woman. Now considered one of the most influential philosophers of the Northern Renaissance, within his prodigious body of work, Erasmus reflected on a myriad of topics, including nature versus nurture, the complexities between words and objects, ideal forms of human governance, and the nature of religious faith. Best described as a Christian humanist, his philosophy of life combined Christian thought with classical traditions, promoting educational programs that called for docta pietas, or learned piety, and ad fontes, where he advocated for the study of biblical texts in their original languages of Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Living, studying, and teaching abroad for much of his life, having only lived in his namesake city for a total of 4 years, Erasmus produced his pioneering edition of the Greek New Testament, while his other notable works include The Praise of Folly, Handbook of a Christian Knight, On Civility in Children, Julius Excluded, and The Education of a Christian Prince. While many of his books were banned by the Catholic Church, his ideas and works experienced a robust revival during the Age of Enlightenment, when he was regarded as a progenitor to the philosophy of rationalism. In his political writings, Erasmus advocated for consensus, compromise, and peaceful cooperation, positions largely rejected by key thinkers of the Reformation. Erasmus also challenged Martin Luther's sectarianism, sparking heated polemics between both men over heuristics, or learning by self-discovery, further taking issue with Luther's view of the Bible as the inerrant Word of God, instead stressing the importance of faith and devotion over biblical scholarship. When his strength began to fail in 1536, Erasmus accepted an invitation by Queen Mary of Hungary, the regent of the Netherlands, to move from Freiburg to the Duchy of Brabant, which was then a region in the Holy Roman Empire in southern Holland, passing away on July 12th of that same year from a sudden attack of dysentery while on a visit to Basel, Switzerland, making the life and philosophies of Erasmus of Rotterdam an important voice in the Christian humanism movement of the Northern Renaissance. Michelangelo. Born in 1475 Caprese, Italy, during his youth, Michelangelo cared little about school, but instead spent hours in nearby churches, watching painters at work while drawing precise replicas of what he saw. Realizing his son's immense talent as a painter, Michelangelo began his apprenticeship to Florentine painter Domenico Ghirlandaio at just 13 years of age, before studying classical sculpture under the watchful eye of Florentine ruler Lorenzo de' Medici of the powerful Medici family, giving young Michelangelo remarkable access to the social elite of Florence, not to mention poets, scholars, and humanists of the day. By the tender age of 16, Michelangelo had already produced two magnificent and still surviving relief sculptures, the Battle of the Centaurs and Madonna seated on a step. After living and working in Bologna for a time, Michelangelo returned to Florence in 1495, where he produced his now famous Cupid sculpture, before moving to Rome at the behest of Cardinal Riaro of San Giorgio, where he would remain for the rest of his life. Known for his contentious personality, quick temper, and bouts of melancholy, Michelangelo's constant push for artistic perfection oftentimes found him at odds with his employers. Yet his obvious talents made him uncommonly famous during his lifetime. Of his surviving works, his most notable sculptures include the Pietà, his sculpture of David, and his paintings that adorn the walls and ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Vatican City. Known most notably as a sculptor and a painter, Michelangelo wrote volumes of poems and sonnets, and while he never married, he was devoted to a pious and noble widow named Vittoria Colonna, sending her more than 300 poems and sonnets before her death in 1547. Michelangelo was also an accomplished architect, where he designed the Medici Chapel in Florence, the Laurentian Library housing the Medici family book collection, as well as chief architect for the construction of St. Peter's Basilica. He passed away on February 18, 1564, just weeks before his 89th birthday, making the life and works of Michelangelo one of the high-water talents of the Italian Renaissance. Nicholas Copernicus. After studying astronomy and astrology at the University of Padua, in 1503, polyglot and polymath Nicholas Copernicus received his doctoral degree in canon or ecclesiastical law from the University of Ferrara, returning to his Polish homeland to become a church administrator and a doctor. His passion for astronomy soon brought him notoriety within the Catholic Church, where in 1514, he was consulted by church officials in their effort to reform the Julian calendar. Dating back to ancient times, philosophers clung to the belief that the heavens were arranged in circles, despite the fact that many observers recorded planetary movements that sometimes appeared to halt in their orbits around Earth in a retrograde path across the sky. In response to some of these dogging inconsistencies, in the 2nd century AD, Alexandrian geographer and astronomer Ptolemy proposed a more refined Earth-centric universe, arguing that the known planets moved about the Earth in small circles or epicycles of varying speeds. More than 1,000 years later, in 1514, Copernicus wrote a short astronomical treatise, which translates to the Little Commentary, setting forth the foundations of his heliocentric or sun-centered universe, where he correctly noted the order of the known planets. A second body of works known as the Six Books, most notably on the revolutions of the celestial spheres, was published in 1543, the year of his death, which saved Copernicus from later charges of heresy by the Catholic Church during the Inquisition's 1616 banning of his works. In his largely academic and unreadable Revolutions, Copernicus correctly postulated that the Earth and other known planets in the universe revolved around the Sun at varying rates of speed, while the Earth in turn spun on its axis, rotating around the Sun in 1-year intervals. While his failure to conceptualize the reality of elliptical orbits and the impact of gravity on celestial bodies, his work was later embraced by 17th century thinkers such as Galileo and Johannes Kepler, which resulted in Galileo's trial and conviction of heresy before living out the remainder of his life in comfortable house arrest. After Isaac Newton's insights into celestial mechanics late in the 17th century, acceptance of a sun-centered Copernican theory began to spread throughout non-Catholic countries until its near universal acceptance by the late 18th century, making Nicholas Copernicus an early disruptor in man's ongoing search for celestial truths. Today in the Daily Dose, Sandro Botticelli. Born Alessandro di Mariana de Vanni Filippetti in 1445 Florence, Italy, Sandro Botticelli's early paintings were heavily influenced by the artistic techniques of Filippo Lippi and Andrea del Verrocchio, which allowed the young artist to develop a unique style during the Italian Renaissance, characterized by delicate figures, flowing lines, and a sense of grace and beauty. Most famous and cherished from his early years as a painter include Madonna and Child and Madonna and Child with an Angel. As his techniques and skills matured, Botticelli would produce his most famous and renowned works, including The Birth of Venus, portraying the goddess Venus surrounded by nymphs and zephyrs, while his Primavera is an allegorical composition featuring various mythological figures in a lush garden setting, symbolizing the arrival of spring. During his lifetime, Botticelli enjoyed the patronage of the powerful Medici family, who were prominent supporters of the Florentine art scene, including other famous artists such as Brunelleschi, Donatello, Fra Angelico, and Michelangelo. Receiving numerous commissions from the Medicis and other wealthy supporters, their patronage allowed Botticelli to experiment with a number of religious or mythological subjects, employing graceful techniques which made him famous during much of his lifetime, while injecting a significant influence over the development of modern painting techniques during the remaining years of the Italian Renaissance. Much of Botticelli's work would fall out of favor by the late 1490s, however, when the political and religious climate was altered by the fiery Italian reformer Girolamo Savonarola, after the Dominican priest voiced his outright contempt for secular art, leading Botticelli to burn many of his pagan works at the now infamous Bonfire of the Vanities. After his death in 1510, his work remained largely unappreciated for centuries to come, until early Renaissance art was rediscovered by pre-Raphaelite art connoisseurs in the 19th century. Today, Botticelli's emotional depth and harmonious compositions remain widely celebrated as one of the greatest painters of the Italian Renaissance, making Sandro Botticelli yet another standout attraction in art museums the world over. And there you have it, Sandro Botticelli, today in the Daily Dose. If you like learning something new every day, subscribe to the Daily Dose on YouTube or sign up for emails at dailydosenow.com.